Hello, everyone, and welcome to JKL Media Podcast, where three friends sit around and talk all things pop culture. I am Jesse Jackson. Joining me today on the wheel is Karen.
Hello.
And Lou.
Hello, everyone.
I guess we're in the airport today, maybe. So, the furniture store.
The mall?
Yeah, we are finishing up our discussion of the HBO miniseries Station 11. Today we'll be discussing episode 9 and episode 10. Episode 9, Dr. Chaudhary. Is that, yeah, and then
Chaudhary.
Yeah, Chuck. And then episode 10, Unbroken Circle, which is I love that title. So we're going to break down each individually, but just overall, Karen, started with, how did you feel? Did this mini series stick the landing?
Yes. So hard. 10 out of 10. I would hold up my sign with the 10 on it. I mean, as you're using a stick the landing reference. So, yeah, I really loved it. As I revealed before we started talking just now, I watched it, at least the finale, 3 times in this week. Dr. Chaudhary, I did not watch 3 times. I watched it twice. I always tend to watch things twice if we're going to talk about it. But I couldn't help but watch Unbroken Circle an extra time. It's so good. Just so good.
Yeah. Lou?
Yeah, definitely. The show really nailed it with these last 2 episodes. It really answers or closes the loops on all the character arcs, more or less, and the progression for characters is really emotionally satisfying. It's I do have to say, though, that the TV show is much sweeter than the book. The book leaves all these loops open, so the characters don't. A lot of times, characters don't cross paths again. But there's, with a book, you can kind of build those same connections narratively, whereas in a TV show, you really have to show it, or it's not gonna work unless you have somebody narrating, and that's not always as satisfying. It's pretty rare that works, and it's interesting because, for me, the gold standard for that type of device, and it's my all-time favorite movie, is The Shawshank Redemption, where the narration does work. But the difference between the movie and the book is that in the book, the story ends with Red on the bus, whereas in the movie, we actually get the scene where the two of them meet, even though there's no dialogue, and it pulls back very quickly. So it's not a totally intimate scene, but this adaptation for Station 11 totally goes towards closing character loops that we don't get in the book. So, and they're 2 different experiences, and each are satisfying in their own way. But I really dug how they ended this series. I mean, I was into it last time we talked, just because of the episodes with the children and whatnot, and seeing these people all, I just can't get over, like, they're all so much still in shock from the whole experience of the pandemic and that. And so you're emotionally into it, and you're just waiting for that loop between Kirsten and the Juven to close. And because up until these last 2 episodes, you're kind of thinking, they've made it nebulous enough that you think, well, did he really abandon her? Like, did he really do that? And in this episode, especially Dr. Chaudhary, we find out why he didn't come back. So yeah, it's just was very satisfyingly done. And the last episode, I can understand why Karen watches it so many times, but there's that one shot where, and I think at one point, Kirsten's looking at the poster for the play, and then later on, Dr. Chaudhary's there, and it's shot at such an angle that it takes the longest view of the background behind him, and you just see in the background Kirsten walking by, and you're going, "Oh no, they're not going to meet each other, right?" But yeah, so yeah, I really thought they played it out quite well.
Yeah, we'll get back to that with that episode, but I had the exact same thought. Like, come on,
Yeah.
I was such anticipation of they are so here, and are they going to meet? Are they going to meet? And and one of the tropes of the and I am a big Hallmark Christmas movie guy. I love I'm going through a spell of right now reading Amazon Prime. You can borrow, and there's a whole series of different comedic romance novels set during Christmas. And so I'm going through a spell of that. I'm in that mood. And one of the tropes is when someone has given up for adoption, or like, I thought of you every single day. Here is a year's worth of here is 20 years of letters that I wrote you that I didn't know where to send. And in this case, when we talk about Dr. Chaudhry, it's very clear he never stops worrying about her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and even, he would have left if they had not told him, we went back, we checked on her, she's not there. Because I would have, that's all about, I understand these young women need your help, and you lied about being a doctor. But the idea that no matter how much they needed him, his first obligation is to his daughter, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And by tying up that loose end, you get him to go through this journey. And I love the fact that in the very first episode, Arthur has a heart attack, and Jeevan, with no medical training, no first aid training, no CPR training, nothing, jumps on stage because in his heart, he wants to help. And then we go 9 episodes later where he has the chance to help. And the doctor, who I think is a fascinating character, had lost her license for, these reasons. Yeah. You're a healer. And I think in his nature, he is a healer, and that having someone tell him that makes it's kind of like, oh yeah, that is what I am. And I've been very vocal about how, about halfway through this season, when I was watching the first time, I was frustrated and wasn't sure if I was going to stick with it. And then when I got to the last half, I went, and these 2 episodes absolutely, in my mind, stuck the landing, made me forgive any earlier doubts I had. Like, unlike Battlestar Galactica, where there really wasn't a plan, this showrunner had a plan. He had, and she had a story and they knew exactly how to tell it to give us the most emotional payoff, including Shakespeare, right? This is so clearly, instead of just subtly, as I was talking to my buddy, he goes, yeah, all movies steal from Shakespeare in a lot of ways. This blatantly, shows its thing. So, let's talk about it does look like it's a furniture store, because there's all these beds and things, and Jeevan and Kristen are making their way. They've got a few, like, they've been cooped up. He's tired of her sticking her head in her iPhone all the time, which is Station 11 book. I can't tell you how often my wife and son have criticized me. Like, you're not even paying attention, Dad. Get your face out of your phone. So I get his frustration. I also get her, like, what do you want? Let's start with you, Karen. Their relationship before he gets kidnapped.
Yeah. I thought it was more like a target, and not that makes any difference at all. But for some reason, I thought maybe a Target because they had supplies and stuff like that. And again, doesn't matter at all. But I really appreciated the fact that, and I've mentioned this before, I think in the last podcast, that I think Jeevan is saying to himself a lot of the time, I'm not a parent. This chick just glommed onto me and she's a responsibility that I didn't want. And especially since they're in the woods, sequestered. And he says to her, I need adults and you need other children. We got to get out of here. And she doesn't care. She's fine. She's probably lived her life on her own. We learned that her home life wasn't good. So, she's good. She's got her books. She's got her iPhone now. She's more than fine. And he is definitely not. And we get to see that Jeevan is definitely not the right guy to be her guardian, at least in the beginning of the episode, that, he lies to the person about being a doctor. They called him Leavin' Jeevan as a nickname, that he just never followed through on anything. He's come to really resent her, even though she's like a better hunter than he is. She's like providing for him and, giving him the company he needs. He takes it for granted. And he throws away her book, which I thought was kind of a dick move. And I don't know. At the beginning of this episode, you don't like him at all. And you think, he's got this little girl protecting him. She's got the sight trained on him from the gun to make sure he doesn't get kidnapped or whatever. And she doesn't protect him. She lets him get hit on the head, which I thought was funny. She definitely saw that person coming, right? And then she goes and, makes sure he's okay. But I see the super dysfunctional relationship they have in the beginning of the episode. I understand why he would be resentful. And I'm giving away a little bit here, do not have children. We decided early on in our marriage that we weren't going to have children. So if I was saddled with a kid and had to be with them 24/7, I might go a little crazy. I realized that I've never been a parent and I don't know how to be one. I mean, I definitely have my backseat driving advice for parents that just, let their kids run wild or whatever. But I think I kind of understand where he's coming from, but he's a dick. So, there's that flawed portion of Jeevan. And I like how we see how he's matured. Like, he got better because of the pandemic. And so did Kirsten, for that matter. But his journey was so transformative. And it took going through a lot of different tragedies to make him into this person. So interesting, I thought.
Lou?
I think the episode title is the most appropriate one out of all the episode titles in the series. Dr. Chaudhry was his role that he didn't know that he wanted to be, or it was his destiny and he wasn't aware of it, because in the before time, most of his basic needs were provided by civilization or society. So he could float through life for the most part. And it wasn't until pandemic that he had to take on more responsibilities. And even then, when he found a place of safe haven, he fell back into old habits. So when he, and this episode had the only jump scare is when the wolf jumped across the screen. I was like, oh shit, that caught me off guard because the show is so low key, right? So that one moment really got jolted me. But and then his, him getting his foot chewed off like that was like, wow. But the whole experience that he has after his, his petulance, like him and Kirsten leave separate on a bad note. She thinks he's abandoned him. and he feels guilty because he acted childishly and threw her Station 11 graphic novel away. So it was his own punishment, I guess you could say, that he got attacked like he did, because he had to go back out and get the novel. But once he's into the furniture store with all these pregnant women, and he's again very reluctant, doesn't want to be involved, but over the course of the episode, he's slowly drawn into it. And then once he gets, into the heat of the battle, you could say, then he's going around providing support for these women. He's not really doing anything majorly doctorally, but he's just supporting, being a support and helping these all these women out. And it's not all beds and roses, because one of the girls doesn't make it, and that's a bit of a downbeat, but that's part of the circle of life too, I guess you could say. And he has to experience that, and in a way, he's actually reborn, I guess you could say, because of what happens during this episode. And then he finally finds his calling in life, and he becomes sort of like the doctor for the area, which is which is cool. The only skills that he really seems to show as a doctor, though, is that he's the one that butchers the meat and cuts it up in that. So he's got some surgeon skills, I guess you could say. But yeah, I just, again, very understated in this episode, like the whole series. There's no big, bombastic, like blinding moment where he's reborn. It's just a subtle change that carries on out of this episode into the next one. And it's just, it's just seeing all these babies being born. This is the new generation. You realize that the world is going to go on in one form or another, and it's just very basic emotional moments that you can really grab onto, and you're so invested in it because you've been waiting for this one particular character to get out of his shell or get by his deficiencies and become the person that we all believe that he could become. And that finally happens in this episode, and waiting for that may be an exercise in patience that not every viewer is going to be willing to put up with. But if you can do it, it's definitely worth it in this episode to see that payoff here and the continuation of the payoffs in the next episode.
Yeah, I love the fact that the doctor, he whispers to her, "I'm not really a doctor." And she decides that we're going to continue the facade because we need hope. And then he slowly learns, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. I did love the scene about, "Where's your Oreo?" "Well, I ate it." "Oh, that was to
5 centimeters.
Yeah, 5 centimeter. But that's okay. We have other Oreos. And and you would think that over the years he would pick up practical knowledge, and I'm sure, in my mind canon, he found other medical textbooks, he found other things that he could, use.
Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah, he had a Grey's Anatomy.
And slowly learned how to heal. And you sure that, as he went to the museum, which was part of his round, he also could be able to find things, right? Mm-hmm. So I love his journey. I love the idea that he gets a happily ever after, right? He connects with the one woman, and you later
what are we doing?
Yeah.
Are we hugging?
Yeah.
That was so funny.
And she ends up, they become a couple, and they have children, and they seem to be very happy, and his kids threw his stethoscope in the lake, and you hope he's going to be able to find another one. Yeah. It's just a really sweet character arc.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the book, he ends up becoming a doctor as well, but much further south. I think he almost ends up in Florida or something like that, but I can't remember. But him and Kirsten never crossed paths again, so it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad they did it this way.
Yeah, the more I hear, the more I do not feel like I want to read the book. That
Well,
I
again,
like
it's
this,
a different beast, right? So,
yeah, I love it is. So I guess in the source novel, he had been trained to be a paramedic. So that's what I just read somewhere that, in the book, he talks about that.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really like this beat for him. And I do love the fact that he, the one mom that's losing, that she's not going to make it. He's there for her to comfort her.
And we'll see that in the next episode too.
Yeah. And then we find out that there's a connection to Tyler David, right? He shows up. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. There are these threads getting together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we see that he wants to take the baby, or he asks about taking the baby.
Yeah.
And is that part of why he begins that like Lost Boys type outpost, that he has that kind of affinity? Mm-hmm. And I also liked how they made both Jeevan and Kristen have a wheel.
Yeah.
That they both are on a wheel of sorts.
Yes.
I just thought that synergy was really cool.
Yeah. And the idea that I also love the story about the birth rate about at the big blackout that was all not true. That's just, urban legends.
Mm-hmm.
The anything else we need to talk about in this episode to cover?
No, I just, again, just really well acted and
yes,
so low key, subtle, but yeah, it was just seeing all those women giving birth was just really emotional, and seeing Javin jump into the fray was that kind of like that Rocky running up the steps for the with no hitch in the side for the first time. I just it's just a real quiet fist pump moment.
Yeah. Himesh Patel, I thought was really good in Yesterday, but I really love him in this. That just it is a very low key performance.
Yeah,
that just really, really shines.
And super emotional.
Yes.
I mean, you see him talking to Frank, having these kind of hallucinations, I guess.
Yeah.
And he hugs Frank there. I find his performance has incredible emotional impact while still being very low key.
Yes.
And that takes a lot of talent.
Yeah. And the guilt of surviving he knew his sister who was, died before, right at the beginning of the pandemic, seeing his brother die in front of him. Mm-hmm. So the guilt of, I hope Kirsten is okay. He plays that really, really in a lot of depth. And I like the fact that, at the end of this episode, we get that, okay, his life, he's found meaning, he's found joy, and he has built a life of service in this post-pandemic world.
Yeah.
So very nice. All right, going to Unbroken Circle. So one of my favorite songs is Will the Circle Be Unbroken? I think it is a absolutely amazing song. I can remember Roseanne Cash in an interview once said, if we're all in a special, we're like, what are we going to end with? We just should end with, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? So seeing Unbroken Circle, also think of the Harry Chapin song, All My Life's a Circle, sunrise to sunset, and the wheel, right? It all kinds to come together. And this is a very wrapping up all the storylines, but in my mind, in a very unrushed, uncomplicated, just really well done. I don't feel like this episode rushes. I don't feel like they strain. Sometimes you see a show where you go, oh, I saw the effort they were putting in this to kind of connect these things. In my case, it doesn't. And I am constantly, while watching this, worried, is Kirsten and Jivy not going to get together? Are they going to leave us unsatisfied? Are they going to they keep missing each other? And when we get that payoff where he sees her and she sees him, I am actually tearing up a little bit now just thinking of that emotional satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
So, Lou, I'll start with you this time.
Well, what can you say? I mean, it all comes together quite nicely and very satisfactorily. It's, as you mentioned, that scene where Kirsten and Javine see each other. I was kind of going, I could see Kirsten recognizing Javine, but could Javine really recognize her? But I guess maybe there's, he knew her well enough that he probably would. And I think that scene is a perfect example of keep it simple, stupid. There's no dialogue. They just stare at each other. They come together and then they just hug. And it's just nothing needs to be said because it's all in their actions there. And the relief in both of those characters' eyes. And it's just something to behold. And especially for Kirsten. And you just know that off screen, they probably compared notes and she found out why he never came back and so forth. And we don't need to hear that because we've just gone through it. So that stuff is all left off the screen. And it's just great to see the two of them together. And then they're at the end when they're walking down the road and where they have to take their different paths, fork in the road. She goes left, he goes right.
And not to interrupt you, but is that not a perfect image?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, it is in a lesser director, a lesser story. Like, okay, this is a little too on the nose, but in this, it was perfect.
Yeah.
Yes,
it was. Yeah. And yeah, it's just great to see both of these characters at peace, or finally comfortable in their own skin, I guess you could say at the end of this. So that like the circle's been closed. I also love the fact that Javine was with Sarah as she had her last few minutes before she passed away from her heart attack. And the rain was a nice addition to the scene. And she goes, "Can you hear that?" And I just thought that was really nice. And it was just good for her or him to be there for her. And I'm hoping that was again another off-screen conversation that Kirsten had with Javine about Sarah's passing. Mm-hmm. There's quite a few other storylines, and I don't want to steal everything, but so I'll just hand it over to you, Karen, if you want to add anything and go to the other storylines.
Yeah, we just briefly mentioned songs, right? And they played United We Stand in this episode. And they also sang Midnight Train to Georgia. And those two songs, while I can't say that they kind of had a subtext, were amazing, as far as atmospheric issues. I mean, United We Stand plays a couple times, and that is, I mean, the tone of the song, whether the words match up or not, really epitomize this persevering.
Yes.
And together persevering. I enjoyed that part. There were other little beats that I liked. First of all, we see why Clark wasn't as good an actor. He just was not as good.
Right. Which
I thought was a good beat because we know the actor's a good actor. So, how hard did he have to work to become this horrible Shakespearean actor? He just was not good. That scene between Tyler and him where Tyler pulls the knife, they realize he's got that knife. I'm sure it's Kirsten's knife, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Because she set it aside. She said, "I don't need to carry these anymore." Then he has it. He pulls it on Clark. And you're thinking, how close did he think about just killing him right there?
Yeah.
He's unhinged. We know that. He has serious psychological issues. He would have in the real world because of how his father treated him and everything. But then you put this pandemic on top of it and how his mother treated him and how Clark treated him. And then he, fakes his own death. All of these things led to him becoming this person that is so unpredictable. You think he could have very easily killed Clark in that moment. And Clark saying, I loved him too, was really one of the only things he could have said.
Yeah.
To save his life.
And I love at the end, skipping ahead, Tyler and his mom reunite. She's going to go with him, as makes total sense. Mm-hmm. She's like, I've spent your adult life not being together. If you don't want to stay here, I'm going with you. And for Clark to go, don't be a stranger, and to send that. And there seems to be, and I love the fact that Kirsten knows that Tyler and his mom can't talk. And she picks a scene from Hamlet that lets them say the things they need to say in someone else's words is beautiful. And the idea that, okay, nope, I'm now directing, you're Gertrude. And Clark immediately gets that too. Okay, well then I'm going to be Claudius. And that the whole subtext of watching the play, and we know there's other things going on, just really is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well staged. And again, the set work was great. The costuming was just fantastic. And yeah, what can you say? I mean, it's just everything just comes together so nicely. And, the circle of life, or in the Dark Tower Stephen King series, Take a Drink, Ka is a wheel, fate is a wheel, and life is a wheel. So it's all there. It's really well done. Where it really departed from the novel was with the Miranda character. She never contacted the plane to get and try to convince the captain to don't disembark. So that was a nice touch, actually. And she didn't have like a business partner with her or anything like that, where she was in Malaysia. She just basically went out to the pool and there's like the lounge chairs there, and she just basically lay there and look at all these ships that she was trying to consign cargo to, and that was her last scenes in the book. So this one where she actually through almost technobabble means connects with the pilot in the airplane, but you don't really care because the payoff was really nice. And again, it's closing that loop. It's her version of Station 11, doing its best to save the survivors of the Holocaust or whatever in her story. So I thought that was a nice addition. And again, it's just, this is much more much more audience friendly telling of the story as opposed to the book, I guess you could say. Is it an improvement? I guess emotionally, but from a literary writer's perspective, they probably wouldn't agree. But because they would say this is being a little too blatant or whatever. But I think the show mostly overcomes that by being so low key and subtle, and it's just thought it was really well done in all aspects. And the only disappointment I really had was I thought Enrico Colante was going to have a much bigger role in the series than he did, and he just kind of popped in and out. Yeah. So that was too bad. I was expecting something more from him, but it didn't pan out.
That was a funny scene where he's trying to rehearse, and then he jumps on and decides to go. And I love that Karen talked about it, but them doing the midnight train to Georgia was so beautiful. Yeah. And in their honor of Sarah, and the idea that they love traveling. The traveling symphony loves traveling, and they love their life. They love the idea. And, Curtis says, we're going to add the museum to the wheel. So, and bring your family next year is the idea. You don't get come live with my family. And no, she's perfectly happy. She has a new, healthy, loving family that she's traveling with, and a fulfilling, quote unquote, career. And he has a wonderful, loving family and fulfilling career. And so that fork in the road, they're each going on their own path, but they made arrangements that now then we'll see each other at least once a year and we will celebrate and love each other is just a really beautiful ending without being sappy.
Yep.
And you also could think of that Tyler and his mom would come back and visit, and that maybe they've built that bridge. And it is kind of a little confusing when you see all the children going off and Clark goes, "What the F?" But it's the idea that, and them stealing this Kirsten's copy of the book and giving it back and all that forth. It was just really, really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to mention also, Lou mentioned that, Kirsten and Jeevan, they have that moment, and it's not a moment, it's longer than that.
Yeah.
Where there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
But they look at each other and they're having a conversation.
Yes.
And I really love that. That one of my favorite things is when actors can convey everything with nothing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene, and we mentioned Grey's Anatomy, the book.
Yeah.
But the show, in the first season, George and Izzy have this kind of weird relationship where they're talking about becoming romantically involved, and they go into a closet when there's some kind of strife between them, and they have a conversation without talking, and it's a very powerful scene. I remember it. I don't watch the show anymore, and I can remember that scene vividly, where they just, their backs are up against the shelves across from each other, and they look at each other, and you can hear them having this conversation without them saying anything.
Yeah.
And I felt the same thing with this, that they are, she knows it's him. And I think it takes him a minute or two, but he realizes that's Kirsten. It's not sinking in. And when he sees how she's looking at him and he's looking back at her, and there's just this whole, I can't believe I'm seeing you again. I love you. I miss you. All of these things going through their mind.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. On both of their parts, I think. Kirsten left him as well. So, it was so powerful, that scene. And that's when I broke down watching it. That's when I cried.
Yeah, me too.
It was just impactful, powerful. And again, it's one of those things where you see the actor's talent.
Yes.
And I mean, I think that was the best thing ever. And also the use of the graphic novel throughout the series. But in this episode, in order to stop the girl from blowing up something, she uses the book, and then the girl takes off with it and gives it to Tyler, which I loved. You mentioned that was cool too.
Yeah.
Because he burnt his copy. Kirsten doesn't need it anymore. So let's give it to Tyler.
Yeah.
It's so great. I cannot think of a miniseries ending that was this satisfying. And I would say, Lou, it might not be better than the book. I would say we don't have to say better or worse.
Right.
They're two different animals. And I say this a lot of times, like about Watchmen, about the Sandman. They don't follow everything perfectly. And it doesn't need to. You get the overall feeling for it. You could say that this is an adaptation of it.
Yep.
Kind of like they do Hamlet, but it's not really Hamlet,
Exactly. Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, I would never complain. I'm a bookophile, a bibliophile. I never get upset about that. They're two different mediums. So I think I'll read the book. I mean, I have it in my to be read file, which is incredibly long as my arm. But it's one of the books that I wanted to read before we started this. And now after we've seen it, I also want to read it because from what Lou says, it's different. It's different enough that it would probably be almost a different experience reading it. So I'm excited at that prospect that I could see another take on it. And even if it's not as and I say quote unquote satisfying, I think it would probably, and I'm just guessing here, since you agreed to watch the miniseries after reading the book, that you didn't hate the book.
Yeah.
No, I quite enjoyed it. Yeah, and the satisfaction that you get in the series, I still got it in the book, but it's just a different flavor.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I mean, and I would hope that maybe me saying this would help some people almost change their mind on being stringent about wanting the television adaptation or movie adaptation to be exactly like the book. I celebrate that. I love seeing a different take on things. Yeah. The source material is the same, but you get to see someone else's vision of it. And I think that's a really great thing.
What is, I can't remember, there was a famous writer like in the 30s or 40s that in an interview someone said, what do you feel about Hollywood ruining your book? And he pointed to the book on the shelf and said, Hollywood didn't do anything to my book. It's right up there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, I just Googled really quickly that she and showrunner Patrick Somerville, known for his work on The Leftovers, which is another great show.
Oh, that's amazing.
Were friends prior to working together. And so when he proposed departures from the source material, like reimagining the relationships between the novel's two protagonists, Mandel was happy to give her blessing. He came to me pretty early and said, I wanted to change the setting of the show from Toronto to Chicago. I was fine with that. And she says, quote, I don't remember if he cleared the Kirsten and Jeevan plotline with me, but for the record, I love it, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
So I found this ending very hopeful.
Yep. I
found this ending, and once again, will the circle be unbroken? That this is about connections and how connections can be stretched, they can be pushed, but ultimately they remain. And it is a very uplifting ending considering it's about post-pandemic.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
but it didn't have to be pandemic.
Right.
The pandemic wasn't the point of it.
Yeah.
Where it takes this lead role, but it could have been anything. It could have been a nuclear war. It could have been just a war, a plain war. The pandemic is just the vehicle upon which the relationships are built. And that's, the character evolution in this show, as you guys know, I'm very drawn to things that are character heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a perfect example of that. So, and I think maybe it was Harper Lee. I mean, she's female, but I think it was Harper Lee when they were discussing To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
That they asked her something to the effect of, do you like the adaptation? Do you, and she said, yeah, they didn't do anything to my book. They just made a movie based on my book, which I love.
Yeah. Emily St. John Mandel also said, it would have been a different book if I'd been a mother when I wrote it. Maybe even a better book. That's what I admire about the TV adaptation, she says. The people who created it have kids, and that's a much harder thing to imagine. So, and I do agree, now then after talking about it, I may want to read it and to compare. So I guess you guys can understand now why when it was my turn to pick something, I went, I think this is something that not only will you guys enjoy, but I think it's something we could have fun discussing. There was enough depth and talk in it.
It was great that we came from 3 different perspectives as well. Absolutely. It's usually newbies and veteran. Yeah. And this, we had a book reader, a series watcher, and a noob.
Yeah.
And I think that made for a really nice balance.
I agree. Things. So any final thoughts we need to get into before we wrap it up?
No, not really. I would just recommend this series to everyone, and just because it's only 10 episodes, just give it a chance to get through those first 3 or 4 episodes. And I think by the 5th episode, you'll start to get hooked on the characters. And then from there, you'll be quite invested in it. And this is one of those quieter things that won't probably garner a lot of attention compared to other series of the same length, which are usually more dramatically amped up on that. But this is just a really beautiful, gentle tale, and I really liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, I'd recommend it to anyone. And I'm not saying you didn't say that. We talk about genre stuff, and this is dystopian, which would be classified as a genre, sci-fi dystopian sort of thing. But honestly, I don't think anyone would have a hard time relating to it. It's about people and human relationships, and it's just, especially if you're like into literature, they talk about Hamlet, and there's lots of parallels to the story. If you're into acting, if you'll recognize a lot of the stereotypes of actors in this show. And I highly recommend it to anyone. I'm going to go out and talk about this to other people. So I think that's that is something that tells you how good a series is if we're willing to recommend it to everyone. So
yeah, I agree. I think this was really one of I definitely put this up with like the HBO Watchmen sequel, is just a really well done. And I love the fact that it's one and done. It is a very powerful miniseries. And one of the reasons it pays off to me is that I was so frustrated at the beginning, and then to have all my frustrations addressed, going, oh, that makes this a really enjoyable journey. So super.
Do you guys mind talking about the quotes as well?
No,
I mean,
please.
I pasted some of them in our document that we all have a document open.
Yeah.
I remember Damage. I mean, that's a big one for me. I have found you 9 times before, maybe 10, and I'll find you again. I find you because I know you, and I know you because we are the same.
Yeah.
I mean, how much do you get out of that and apply it to this story, real life? It's crazy. There's a post on my blog talking about how my husband and I crossed paths many times before we actually met each other. And we met each other at a place called Destiny, which I thought was cool. We went to the same bar. My father worked at an oil plant that my brother also worked at. We stayed in a hotel that he had worked at about the same time in Florida. Just, things, it's like we had these near hits. I would say near misses, but near hits is better. And it really reminds me of the way things can be so coincidental, and yet it's almost inevitable. And that line in particular, kind of those lines hit a nerve for me, and they also like really go with the show as well. So, and I don't want to live the wrong life, then die was crazy.
Yeah.
And then I stood looking over the damage, trying to remember the sweetness of life on earth, but I couldn't remember. I mean, wow. That is some good writing. So
it is. And I love the idea that, Miranda was able to convince the pilot, we slowly touched on that, but the idea that, is it just fair to have these people just die in this? And there's nothing fair about this at all. But it is very touching. I did. I looked up. I mentioned the Harry Chapin song, "All My Life." "All My Circle" is the name of the song, and he says, "It seems like I've been here before. I can't remember when, but I have this funny feeling that we'll all be together again. No straight lines make up my life. All my roads have bends. There's no clear-cut beginnings, and so far, no dead ends. I found you 1,000 times. I guess you've done the same. And then we lose each other. It's like a children's game. As I find you here again, a thought runs through my mind. Our love is like a circle. Let's go around one more time."
Crazy.
Yeah, just very, very clear. Yeah.
Yeah. I would just add that if I had to one line summarize this series, it's a line from, and I think I've mentioned this on other podcasts, it's from John Carpenter's Starman with Jeff Bridges, when he says, I find that people are often at their best when things are at their worst.
Yeah, that's really well done. Yeah, exactly. It is odd that you could find a show that is this about this circumstances, and I think it's also a strong art matters.
Yeah,
whether it's books or whether it's plays or whether it's music, it matters, and I'm really, really happy that we did this. All right,
same here.
Okay. So we're going to drop these all at one time. So thank you guys for, we've been doing this over the several weeks, but you guys get to binge it. I really do hope people will check it out and then listen to this and let us know what you think. Karen, if someone wants to reach you, how can they?
I am at Eleveria, a lot of different places. And my blog is alicestuff.com.
All right. Lou?
You can find us at Lou's Reviews on YouTube, where this will go up, along with our other JKL media installments, where we've done Midnight Mass, Devs, and now Station 11. And our next one will be The English, which is a limited miniseries that just dropped on Netflix, I think maybe November. So we'll be doing that one next, and I'm really looking forward to seeing reactions from Jessie and especially Karen, because she's the big romance reader. So it'll be interesting to see what she thinks of this. She might come out of it hating me afterwards, but we'll see.
No, absolutely not.
And you can find me on Twitter at Lou W. Sitzmore or S King Podcast.
Yeah, I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter. Please check us out. I am looking forward to. I've watched the first episode and I'm in. So we're going to be doing this 2 episodes at a time as our normal format. And so come back in a couple of months for this one, but come back next week for another discussion of Babylon 5. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, listeners. Be safe, be kind, and we will see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. And scene.
The proceeding has been a JKL Media production.